Imagine a vast ocean of money, trillions upon trillions of dollars sloshing around the globe. That's the world of finance. And just like the real ocean, it needs markers, buoys, something to guide the ships. That's where Libor comes in. Short for the London Interbank Offered Rate, it's the interest rate banks use to lend to each other. Think of it as the bedrock, the foundation on which countless financial transactions are built. Mortgages, student loans, credit cards, all are tied to this seemingly simple number. Libor wasn't some algorithm, some computer spitting out a figure. It was determined by a daily survey. Every morning, a select group of major banks would answer a simple question. At what interest rate could they borrow money? They'd submit their rates, the highest and lowest were tossed out, and an average, the Libor, was born. This number, this average, wasn't just some abstract figure. It was the pulse of the global financial system. When Libor went up, borrowing became more expensive and the effects rippled outward. When it went down, money flowed more freely. But what happened when that pulse, that seemingly untouchable benchmark, was manipulated? What happened when the foundation itself began to crumble? Tom Hayes wasn't born on Wall Street. He wasn't some silver spoon kid groomed for finance from birth. He was different. Diagnosed early on with Asperger's, he saw the world through a different lens. Numbers weren't just numbers to Hayes, they were patterns, puzzles to be solved, and few puzzles were as complex or alluring as the world of finance. He started at the bottom, a back-office grunt at the Royal Bank of Scotland. But he was a quick study, a sponge soaking up the intricacies of derivatives, those complex financial instruments that could mean fortunes won or lost. He rose quickly, his talent undeniable. He landed at UBS, then Citigroup, becoming a star trader, a rainmaker, as they called him, someone who could generate huge profits. Hayes was driven, obsessed even, with understanding the markets, predicting the smallest fluctuations, and he saw an opportunity, a way to gain an edge in the high-stakes world of derivatives trading, the key Libor. He understood the power of that benchmark, how even the smallest nudge could translate into millions in profit. And he knew that Libor, for all its importance, was vulnerable. It was based on trust, on the honesty of those banks submitting their rates each morning. But what if that trust was broken? To understand why someone would manipulate Libor, you have to understand the world Tom Hayes operated in. It was a world of high finance, where billions were traded in the blink of an eye, where fortunes were made and lost on fractions of a percentage point. In this world, information was power, and the ability to influence even the smallest variable could mean the difference between winning and losing. Libor was that variable. For Hayes, it was simple math, a risk-reward calculation, the risk getting caught manipulating a benchmark underpinning trillions of dollars. The reward, untold riches, the kind of money that could change your life, that could cement your legacy in the cutthroat world of finance. He saw an opportunity, a flaw in the system. Libor was based on trust, on the idea that banks would submit honest rates. But Hayes knew that these banks, for all their talk of ethics and integrity, were driven by profit, just like him. And so the seeds of manipulation were sown. Hayes, driven by greed and ambition, set out to exploit the system to bend Libor to his will. He knew that even small movements in the rate could translate into massive profits for his trades. And he was willing to do whatever it took to make those profits a reality. The mechanics of manipulating Libor were surprisingly simple. Remember, it wasn't some complex algorithm, but a system based on trust and human input. Each morning, a group of banks submitted their estimated borrowing rates. These submissions weren't set in stone. They were influenced by a web of factors, market conditions, internal pressures, and as Hayes discovered, a well-placed phone call or email. Hayes, with his deep understanding of derivatives and his network of contacts, realized he could influence these submissions. He started subtly, making requests hinting at desired rates. He cultivated relationships with brokers, those intermediaries who connected traders and banks, showering them with lavish gifts and promises of lucrative trades. These weren't isolated incidents. Hayes, emboldened by early successes, became more brazen, more demanding. He built a network of traders and brokers, all working in concert to nudge Libor in the direction that benefited their trades. Emails flew back and forth, filled with coded language and veiled requests. Instant messages pinged across trading desks, coordinating submissions, ensuring everyone was on the same page. The system, designed to be a reflection of market reality, was being warped, manipulated by a small group of individuals driven by greed, and for a time it worked. Section 5: Shifting Tides, Swelling Profits, the Impact of Manipulation. The consequences of Hayes' actions were far-reaching. Every tiny shift in Libor, every manipulated decimal point rippled through the global financial system. Remember, trillions of dollars in loans, mortgages and derivatives were tied to this benchmark. A seemingly insignificant change could translate into millions, even billions of dollars in profit or loss. For Hayes and his network, it was a goldmine. Their carefully orchestrated manipulations allowed them to profit handsomely from trades that hinged on Libor's movements. They were playing a high-stakes game, and they were winning. But for others, the impact was far less desirable. Pension funds, municipalities, ordinary people with mortgages, all were affected by the artificial rates. Some lost money, their investments failing to deliver expected returns. Others paid more for loans, their monthly payments inching higher. The manipulations distorted the very fabric of the financial system. Trust, the bedrock of any market, was shattered. The scandal exposed a dark underbelly of greed and collusion, where profits trumped ethics and the pursuit of wealth came at the expense of fairness and transparency. Section 6. Justice or Scapegoat. The trial and conviction of Tom Hayes. The house of cards built on manipulation couldn't stand forever. As regulators and journalists began to investigate discrepancies in Libor submissions, a trail of evidence led back to Hayes and his network. The scandal exploded into public view, sending shockwaves through the financial world. In 2015, after a lengthy investigation by the UK's Serious Fraud Office, Hayes found himself at the centre of a high-profile trial. He was portrayed by prosecutors as the mastermind, the driving force behind the Libor rigging scheme. Hayes, once a master of the financial universe, was now a symbol of greed and corruption. His defense team argued that he was a scapegoat, a cog in a much larger machine. They claimed that manipulation was widespread, an open secret in the industry. The jury, however, was unconvinced. Hayes was found guilty of conspiracy to defraud and sentenced to 14 years in prison, a sentence later reduced to 11. He became the face of the Libor scandal, the man who rigged the market. But was he a lone wolf, a rogue trader who went too far? Or was he, as his defense argued, a symptom of a system that incentivized and rewarded reckless behavior? Section 7. Ripples of deceit-related cases and regulatory fallout. The conviction of Tom Hayes was just the tip of the iceberg. The Libor scandal, once exposed, unleashed a torrent of investigations and legal actions that rippled across the globe. It became clear that Hayes was not alone in his manipulations. Other traders and brokers were implicated, their emails and messages revealing a culture of collusion and deceit. Banks, those supposed guardians of financial integrity, were also caught in the crosshairs. Investigations revealed that some had turned a blind eye to manipulation, prioritizing profits over ethics. The regulatory response was swift and severe. Billions of dollars in fines were levied against major global banks including Barclays, UBS and Deutsche Bank. These penalties, while substantial, did little to quell public outrage. Critics argued that they were simply the cost of doing business, a slap on the wrist for institutions that had profited from manipulation. The Libor scandal exposed a systemic failure of oversight and accountability. It led to calls for greater transparency in financial markets and stricter regulations to prevent similar scandals from occurring. It also highlighted the need for a cultural shift within the industry, a move away from the win-at-all-costs mentality that enabled such widespread manipulation. Section 8. A system on trial, the broader implications of the Libor scandal. The Libor scandal wasn't just about a few rogue traders or even a handful of banks. It was a symptom of a much deeper malaise, a systemic rot that had infected the very core of the financial industry. It exposed a culture where greed reigned supreme, where profits were pursued at all costs, and where ethics was sacrificed on the altar of personal gain. The scandal shook public trust in the financial system to its core. It reinforced the perception that Wall Street played by its own rules, that the little guy always lost, and that the system was rigged against them. The fact that no senior executives were ever held criminally liable for their role in the scandal only fueled public anger. The Libor scandal served as a wake-up call, a stark reminder that even the most complex and seemingly impenetrable financial systems are vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. It highlighted the need for greater transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct within the industry. The question remained, could the system truly reform itself? Or would the allure of profit and the pursuit of personal gain continue to trump the principles of fairness and integrity? Section 9. Lone wolf or pack animal, the enduring question. Tom Hayes, the man who rigged Libor, walked out of prison a free man in 2021, having served half his sentence. But the questions surrounding his case and the scandal he came to embody lingered. Was he a lone wolf, a uniquely ambitious and ruthless individual who exploited a flawed system, or was he, as his defenders argued, a product of his environment, a cog in a machine that encouraged and rewarded his behavior? The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between. Hayes was undoubtedly a gifted trader, a man who saw opportunities where others saw only complexity. But he was also operating within a culture that celebrated risk-taking and rewarded those who delivered outsized profits. The Libor scandal forced the financial industry to confront some uncomfortable truths about its own practices and ethics. It highlighted the dangers of unchecked greed and the need for greater accountability. The story of Tom Hayes and the Libor scandal serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the most sophisticated and regulated markets, human greed and the potential for abuse remain ever present. The question is not whether such scandals will happen again, but rather what lessons will be learned and what steps will be taken to prevent them from happening again.